to be the one to tell my point of view.
That's Cam Newton bracing himself before he even gets a full sentence out. And dog, when a grown man pauses like that before talking about a coworker crying on camera, you already know we're not getting a simple take. So here's what you think this video is about. Another media guy getting clowned for shedding a few tears. That's not it, not even close.
Ryan Clark was brought to his knees in front of the world.
That's the actual gut punch buried under all the clickbait framing. And it's got nothing to do with tears being real or fake. Before we get there, quick question for you watching right now. If your job slowly talked you into shrinking who you are just to keep the paycheck, would you even notice you'd done it until the cameras caught you falling apart? Sit with that, because that's exactly the argument about to blow this whole thing wide open.
When you do so much, you just don't know. Crying wolf.
Crying wolf. That's the label hanging over Ryan Clark's head right now. And once sports media pins that phrase on your name, it doesn't come off easy. So buckle in, because between Cam Newton, Shady McCoy, and Emmanuel Acho, nobody agrees on what actually happened in that room. Not one bit. Here's the part that makes this whole thing juicy. This isn't some random YouTube panel taking shots at a guy for content. This is Ryan Clark's own peers, former teammates, current media personalities, guys who've been fired themselves, publicly split on whether his emotional breakdown was real pain or a calculated business decision. And by the end of this video, you're going to have to pick a side too. Ryan Clark spent 12 years at ESPN building himself into one of the most respected football voices in the building. Then the layoffs hit, his name got called, and he sat down for the first episode of his own show, The Pivot, to explain his exit. Instead of a clean farewell, he broke down crying about wanting to be accepted. And that single word, accepted, is what set off a firestorm that's still rolling through NFL media right now. Here's the thing that makes this so combustible. The Pivot isn't some random podcast reacting to news after the fact. It's Ryan Clark's own platform, the show he built specifically so he could finally speak without a network standing over his shoulder. So when the breakdown happened there, on his own terms, in his own chair, surrounded by people he trusts, it hit different than if it had happened live on a SportsCenter set with a producer counting down in his ear. That's exactly why the reaction split the way it did. Some people saw a man finally being honest for the first time in over a decade. Others saw a man who knew precisely which camera to cry in front of. Context. 12 years is a long time to build a reputation in a building as cutthroat as ESPN. Ryan Clark didn't just show up and read a teleprompter. He was a Super Bowl winning safety, an undrafted guy who clawed his way to a 13-year playing career, and then transitioned into being one of the sharpest analysts on the network. He wasn't some replaceable talking head. He was, by his own account, and by the account of guys like Cam Newton who watched him work, one of the most prepared people in the building.
I knew, for lack of a better word, I couldn't be too black.
That's Ryan Clark, in his own words on his own show, explaining how he felt he had to police himself just to keep his seat at the table. That's not a small confession. That's a guy admitting on camera that the version of him that made it on air wasn't the whole version of him. And once that's out there, you can't unhear it. Now here's where the layoffs actually happened. ESPN didn't just let Ryan Clark go. They cut a whole wave of on-air talent in the same round, including guys who've been there for decades covering entirely different sports. Ryan Clark got lumped into a business decision. But instead of taking the standard wish them well exit, he used his own platform to explain in raw detail what those 12 years actually cost him. That's the part nobody expected. The debate. This is where it gets messy, because the reaction split almost instantly and not in the way you'd think.
All I ever wanted to do was be accepted.
That line right there is the whole controversy in 8 words, because depending on who you ask, that's either the most honest thing a black man in sports media has said on camera in years, or it's the most calculated soundbite of the entire year. There is no in-between in this debate, and that's exactly why it's still trending. On one side, you've got Shady McCoy, who flat out said men are being way too feminine these days, and that Ryan's reaction wasn't appropriate. He's not alone in that read either. Plenty of the room agreed the tears felt staged, felt timed, felt like a guy who knew exactly when the emotional beat needed to land for the segment to hit different. On the other side, you've got people pointing out that Ryan Clark has never had a domestic incident, never no-show to shift, never been insubordinate in 12 years, and that if giving your honest opinion on television is literally the job, you can't turn around and call him unprofessional for finally being honest about the cost of that job. And then there's the layer under the layer, the Kyron Lacey situation. Earlier in his ESPN run, Ryan Clark had gone hard defending a young man wrongly accused in connection with a fatal car accident, only for new evidence to surface that forced him and Scott Van Pelt and Pat McAfee into an on-air apology to the police department they called out. Some in the same debate believe that moment, that public embarrassment on the network's 2 biggest daily shows, is what actually got him marked for cuts. Others think that's giving Ryan way too much credit for influence he didn't actually have over what Van Pelt and McAfee choose to say on their own platforms. Either way, it's one more reason a chunk of this audience thinks Ryan's ESPN exit was never purely a business decision. There's also a whole separate argument happening about what it even means to accuse a grown man of faking his own tears in the first place. Once you go down that road, some in this debate point out, you're wading into crying wolf territory. The idea that a guy who's leaned on emotional or dramatic moments before loses the benefit of the doubt the next time it happens, real or not. Others push back hard on that logic, calling it a form of victim shaming dressed up as media criticism, arguing that questioning a man's authenticity the moment he shows vulnerability is exactly the kind of policing that got Ryan Clark into this mess to begin with. Neither side backs down. That tension, more than the tears themselves, is what's actually driving the click count on this story. Turning point. Here's where the story stops being about whether the tears were real and starts being about what Ryan Clark actually thinks of himself.
I am the best football analyst in the world.
That's Ryan Clark's own self-assessment, and Cam Newton doesn't even flinch at it. Because in Cam's mind, that's exactly the swagger a guy at that level is supposed to have. Think about that for a second. This is a guy who watched Ryan Clark grind through the building on a daily basis, catch red-eye flights, still show up after getting called last minute, still out-prepare almost everybody in that newsroom. And even Cam admits he can't fully explain the tears, but he refuses to question the man's talent. That's the split right there in one breath. Everybody agrees Ryan Clark is elite at the job. Nobody agrees on whether the crying was earned. Stakes. Why does any of this actually matter beyond one guy's exit interview? Because this isn't just about Ryan Clark anymore. It's about every black man working in sports media who's watching this unfold and taking notes on what happens when you finally stop performing this safe version of yourself on camera.
I feel bad how they fired him.
That's Shady McCoy, who spent this entire conversation questioning the tears, still drawing a hard line between the emotion and the exit itself. Even the skeptics in this debate aren't defending ESPN's handling of it. And that's the stakes right there. A company can cut talent for business reasons all day long, but the second that talent goes public with how it actually felt, the company's decision gets put on trial in a way a quiet layoff never would have triggered. This isn't isolated to Ryan Clark either. Every media personality watching this reaction knows their own eventual exit. And every media personality has one, because nobody keeps a network chair forever, is going to get held up against this exact standard now. Do you cry? Do you not cry? Do you say too much? Do you say nothing and let people assume the worst? There's no clean answer. And that's exactly why this clip won't stop circulating. Think about the actual business incentive sitting underneath all of this too. A raw, emotional exit interview generates more attention in 24 hours than a decade of solid professional analyst work ever could. That's not a knock on Ryan Clark specifically. It's just the reality of the algorithm every single person in this industry is now operating inside of. Whether the tears were genuine or not, the outcome is the same. More eyeballs on the pivot, more eyeballs on Ryan Clark's name, and a permanent talking point that outlives whatever cushy on-air job ESPN handed him for 12 years. That's the stakes for every single person still cashing a network paycheck watching this play out in real time. Ripple effect. And this is where it gets bigger than sports media entirely, because the conversation didn't stay on the surface for long.
In terms of how he produces and how he wants to have the moment, virality, clicks, and attention. This is out of Acho's mouth, so I'm not even saying anything disparaging.
That's Emmanuel Acho, going in a completely different direction than everybody else in this debate. While Shady's calling it manufactured and Cam's calling it swagger under pressure, Acho's out here saying the tears expose something almost nobody in this industry deals with on camera. The accumulated weight of trying to be palatable for over a decade. And that's the ripple. This one clip turned into a referendum on masculinity, on race, on what men in this specific industry are even allowed to feel in public without getting torn apart for it. Guys who've never met Ryan Clark are now arguing about their own fathers, their own bosses, their own moments of holding it together in front of people who didn't deserve to see them crack. It didn't stop at the panel either. Clips of this debate started circulating with entirely different framings depending on which corner of the internet you landed in. Some cutting it as, media guy caught faking emotions for clicks. Others cutting it as, the moment sports media finally got honest about race. Same footage, two completely different stories, depending on who's doing the editing. And it's rippling sideways into every other media firing from this same round of cuts too. Cam Newton brought up his own guys who got let go around the same time. Friends who got cut loose from other networks with zero fanfare, zero viral moment. Just a badge that stopped working one morning in a group text to explain it. That's the uncomfortable comparison sitting right under the surface of this whole debate. Ryan Clark's exit turned into a national conversation about race, masculinity, and authenticity. A dozen other names from that same layoff round didn't get a single trending topic. Some people watching this gap and think it proves Ryan orchestrated the whole moment for attention. Other people see that exact same gap and think it proves how much extra scrutiny gets applied the second a black man in this industry shows any emotion at all. Even Ryan Clark's own history gets dragged back into it. Older clips resurfaced of him going toe-to-toe with Stephen A. Smith on live television, never backing down, never playing the deferential co-host. That's the Ryan Clark a chunk of this audience remembers and respects. So watching that same guy years later admit he'd been quietly editing himself down just to survive in that building lands as a genuine gut check for anyone who followed his career from the start. Dramatic ending. So where does this actually leave us?
Look, straight up, I think it's manufactured. Absolutely.
That's the host of this exact panel, sitting a feet from Shady McCoy, landing on the harshest read of the entire conversation. And here's the darkly funny part nobody wants to say out loud. It genuinely does not matter whether Ryan Clark's tears were real, because the outcome is identical either way. If they were fake, he just pulled off one of the more calculated media plays of the year and got everybody talking about him on his exit from a job he'd already lost. If they were real, he just handed the entire industry a mirror it desperately did not want to look into. Either way, Ryan Clark wins the internet this week. ESPN's the only one who comes out of this looking worse than when it started. So here's the question we asked you back at the top. If your job slowly talked you into shrinking who you actually are, would you even notice before it all came out on camera? Ryan Clark says he didn't, not until the tears did the talking for him. Shady McCoy says he doesn't believe a second of it. Cam Newton says the tears don't matter because the resume speaks for itself. Emmanuel Acho says this is bigger than Ryan Clark entirely. Nobody in this debate agrees on the verdict. And honestly, that might be the most real thing about this entire story.